Imagine stepping into a courtroom where logic bends, the truth hides behind laughter, and justice wears a crooked smile. In today's case, we're not just observing a trial, we're peeling back the curtain on a story so bizarre, it could only happen in real life. Our focus is on a 2-year deception that captivated not just the courtroom, but the public eye as well. At the heart of this tale lies an individual who, through a web of lies and deceit, managed to convince everyone around them of a debilitating illness. But how far can one go to maintain a facade, and what consequences await when the truth is finally unveiled? As always, all characters are presumed innocent until proven guilty. However, in this courtroom, the verdict might surprise you. So sit back, lean in, and remember, in Court Spiral, reality is stranger than fiction. Let's dive into the case. Our story begins with a seemingly ordinary individual, someone who blended into the crowd. This person lived a life that many would consider typical, but as we dig deeper, we find cracks in the surface. This individual embarked on a journey that would culminate in a courtroom drama that would leave everyone questioning the nature of truth and deception. It all started when this individual began to exhibit symptoms of a serious illness. Initially, these symptoms were vague and could be attributed to a variety of conditions: fatigue, headaches, and occasional dizziness, nothing that would raise immediate suspicion. But as time went on, the symptoms became more pronounced, and the individual began to seek medical attention. Doctors were consulted, tests were run, and a diagnosis emerged. This individual was diagnosed with a chronic illness, one that would require ongoing treatment and management. The diagnosis was in many ways a double-edged sword. On one hand, it provided a valid explanation for the individual's complaints. On the other, it opened the door to a world of deception. Over the course of the next 2 years, this individual not only maintained the ruse but escalated it. Friends, family, and even colleagues were drawn into the narrative. They witnessed the individual struggling with the effects of the illness, attending numerous medical appointments, and sharing stories of treatments and therapies. The sympathy and support from those around them only fueled the deception. But as we know, maintaining a lie requires an immense amount of effort and creativity. This individual became adept at weaving intricate stories about the illness. Each tale was more elaborate than the last, filled with details that made the narrative more convincing. There were hospital stays, emergency room visits, and even interactions with specialists that seemed genuine. At this point, you may be wondering how someone could go to such lengths. What drives a person to create an alternate reality? For many, the reasons can be complex and multifaceted. In this case, the individual may have sought attention, sympathy, or perhaps even financial gain. The motivations behind such deception are often rooted in deep-seated psychological issues, a desire for validation, or a need to escape from the pressures of everyday life. As the deception continued, the individual began to exploit the situation further. With the diagnosis in hand, they filed for disability benefits. This was a significant turning point. The application process required documentation from medical professionals, and the individual was careful to ensure that everything was in order. They had doctors who were willing to support their claims, which only added legitimacy to the facade. The court proceedings that followed were a spectacle. Friends and family members testified on behalf of the individual, describing the struggles they had witnessed. They spoke of the emotional toll the illness had taken and the impact it had on the individual's life. The courtroom buzzed with empathy as witnesses recounted tales of courage and resilience in the face of adversity. But then cracks began to appear in the carefully constructed narrative. As the trial unfolded, inconsistencies started to emerge. Medical records were scrutinized, and discrepancies in the timeline of events became apparent. It turned out that some of the medical visits had been fabricated, or at the very least exaggerated. The defense team struggled to maintain their stance as the prosecution presented evidence that painted a different picture. Witnesses began to retract their statements, admitting the pressure they felt to support the individual's claims. Friends who once believed the stories started to question what they had witnessed. The emotional weight of supporting someone who had deceived them began to take its toll. The turning point came when a key witness, a close friend of the individual, was called to the stand. This person had been a steadfast supporter throughout the ordeal, but as they recounted their experiences, it became clear that they were grappling with their own realization. The truth began to surface, and the courtroom held its breath as the friend hesitated, struggled with their words, and ultimately admitted that they had doubts about the individual's claims. The courtroom atmosphere shifted dramatically. The air was thick with tension, and the audience could feel the gravity of the moment. It was as if a fog had lifted, revealing the stark reality behind the facade. The prosecution capitalized on this moment, presenting evidence that contradicted the individual's carefully crafted narrative. As the trial progressed, the prosecution introduced expert witnesses who specialized in medical fraud. They provided insights into the psychological aspects of faking illness, detailing how some individuals are driven by a pathological need for attention. Their testimonies painted a chilling picture of the lengths to which some may go to maintain their deception. The defense, however, was not without its own strategies. They sought to portray the individual as a victim of circumstance, someone who had genuinely believed in their illness and had merely succumbed to the pressures of life. They argued that the individual had not acted with malicious intent, but rather out of desperation. This argument, while compelling, struggled to hold weight as more evidence emerged. Surveillance footage from various locations showed the individual engaging in activities that contradicted their claims of illness. Scenes of laughter, socializing, and even participating in sports began to emerge, painting a stark contrast to the image of a frail and sickly individual. The prosecution seized on this evidence, framing it as a betrayal of trust. They argued that the individual had not only deceived the court, but had also manipulated the emotions of everyone around them. The emotional toll on family and friends became a focal point, and the audience could feel the weight of betrayal hanging in the air. As the trial neared its conclusion, the jury was tasked with a difficult decision. They had witnessed a complex tapestry of deception, emotion, and manipulation. The case had transformed into a moral quandary, forcing them to confront the darker aspects of human nature. Ultimately, the jury returned with a verdict that stunned many. They found the individual guilty of fraud and deception. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and disbelief. Some witnesses wept openly, grappling with the reality that someone they cared for had orchestrated such an elaborate lie. In the aftermath of the trial, the individual faced severe consequences. Not only were they required to repay any benefits fraudulently obtained, but they also faced a significant prison sentence. The ripple effects of the deception extended far beyond the courtroom. Relationships were strained and trust was shattered. This case serves as a reminder of the profound impact that deceit can have on individuals and communities. It raises questions about the nature of truth and the lengths to which some may go to create a narrative that serves their needs. As we reflect on this story, we are reminded of the complexities of human behavior. The desire for validation, sympathy, and understanding can sometimes lead individuals down a dark path. In the end, justice was served, but the scars left by the deception ran deep. The courtroom may have reached a verdict, but the emotional fallout continued long after the gavel fell. As we conclude our exploration of this extraordinary case, we are left with a lingering question. How do we reconcile our understanding of truth in a world where deception can take on many forms? This case reminds us that the pursuit of justice is not just about the law, it's about the human experience, the stories we tell, and the truths we choose to believe. Thank you for joining us today in this exploration of a case that reveals the intricate dance between reality and illusion. In Court Spiral, where reality is stranger than fiction, we invite you to continue questioning the narratives that shape our lives.